Have you ever found yourself drifting into a moment that felt both ancient and strangely familiar, as if the world around you was unfolding at a slower rhythm, inviting you to breathe a little deeper and listen a little closer? That is the feeling of standing at the edge of a quiet river somewhere deep in the northern jungles of South America, long before roads or borders or engines. When the night sky opened like a vast dark canopy and the only light came from the reflection of the stars on the gently moving water. Close your eyes for a moment and let your breath settle. Imagine the soft movement of warm air brushing your skin while the forest around you exhales its earthy scent, rich with the perfume of leaves, distant flowers, and the damp soil that has fed countless generations of life. The river at your feet flows slowly, carrying with it the murmur of stories told long before you arrived. Stories of travelers, spirits, and cities that shimmered not with stone or marble but with something far more elusive. The world you are stepping into tonight is one where maps were little more than guesses and dreams carried as much weight as facts. Imagine the quiet pulse of a canoe gliding over the water, the sound of wooden paddles breaking the surface with careful, deliberate rhythm, each movement sending ripples outward like whispered invitations. Golden moonlight filters through the tall trees and settles on the river's skin, turning it into a long, wavering path of light. For centuries, people living along these waters spoke of a leader who bathed in sacred gold dust sparkling like a living sun, and of a place where gold was not merely a treasure, but a symbol woven into ritual memory and identity. These were not tales of conquest, but of reverence, shaped to help make sense of a world where nature seemed to glow from within. As you breathe in, imagine the texture of the night, the distant call of insects, the rustle of branches shifting above you, the faint rhythm of drums or chanting carried by the wind. Somewhere far across the water, small fires flicker in the villages perched along the riverbanks, their warm glow stretching out into the darkness. These flames are part of everyday life for countless families preparing food, sharing stories, or watching over their children as they fall asleep under the weight of the warm evening air. None of them know how these same stories, told softly across generations, will one day change the course of continents. Before the legend became a destination for explorers, before it was marked on maps or whispered in royal courts, it was simply part of the world that existed here in the deep green. Imagine a group of villagers gathered around a fire, tracing symbols in the dirt as they speak of rituals that shimmer with meaning. They do not speak of greed or conquest. To them, gold is the color of sunlight, the color of life, the color worn by those who stand halfway between the human and the divine. Their stories drift upward with the smoke and disappear into the canopy, where they linger like echoes waiting to be found again. Now, take a slow breath. Feel the warmth of the night settling into your shoulders, the stillness of the river, and the faint vibration of a world on the brink of being discovered by those who had never seen such landscapes. Tonight, we will wander through those forests, rivers, and memories together, moving softly through the layers of time. If you would like to share where in time or where in the world you are listening from, I'll be glad to read it as part of this quiet journey. And if you would like to return for another night's passage through history and dreams, feel welcome to follow the channel so that I can guide you once again. Our journey begins not with the explorers who would chase the myth, but with the world that gave birth to it. A world shaped by water, by ritual, and by a shimmering promise that would echo across oceans. Let the night open gently around you as we take our first step toward the legend of El Dorado. Before the legend ever crossed an ocean or shaped the dreams of distant kingdoms, there was only the land itself, vast and breathing under the slow rise of the sun. Imagine the early morning light, drifting across endless stretches of forest, touching the leaves one by one until the canopy glows with soft, shifting greens. Mist rises from the rivers like a living veil, curling around tree trunks and drifting through the air with the calm, unhurried movement of something ancient. The world feels suspended between night and day, as if holding its breath in quiet anticipation. Birds call to one another across the stillness, their voices echoing through the layers of vegetation, weaving a tapestry of sound that settles gently into the rhythm of life. In this moment before footsteps or stories reach it, the land feels whole, untouched, and complete. If you pause here and listen, you can almost hear the deep pulse of the forest beneath everything else. The ground carries the soft memory of rain, its scent rising from the earth in a warm, rich aroma that blends with the sweetness of flowers hidden beneath the undergrowth. The river moves nearby, its surface dark and glassy, reflecting the gradual brightening of the sky. Along its banks, slender reeds sway with the faint breeze, brushing together with a whisper so soft it feels like a secret exchanged between them. The air is both warm and cool, depending on where you stand. Warm near the open water where the sun touches the surface, cool in the shadowed pockets beneath broad leaves that shelter insects and small creatures beginning their day. Nothing rushes here. Time unfolds in wide, quiet arcs. Further along the river, small communities wake to the sun as a slow ascend. Smoke rises gently from circular huts as families prepare the first meal of the day. The smell of cooked maize and roasted plantains blending with the natural fragrances of the forest. The soft hum of conversation drifts out with the smoke, punctuated by the laughter of children stepping out into the morning light. Their feet sink into the damp earth as they run toward the river, splashing water into the air and sending ripples that catch the sunlight like shards of gold. To the people who live here, this land is not mysterious or untamed. It is home, familiar and comforting. A place shaped by memory and ritual. They know where to find the sweetest fruits, where the fish gather in the deep pools, and which parts of the forest glow with fireflies once the night returns. As the day unfolds, the forest becomes a mosaic of textures and colors that change with every hour. Sunlight filters through the high canopy, casting gentle patterns across the ground where roots twist in and out of the soil like old stories etched into the earth. The calls of toucans echo from high branches while monkeys swing lazily between trees, their movements smooth and effortless. The deeper you walk into the forest, the more the outside world seems to fade away, until all that remains is the sound of your breath, mingling with the steady hum of insects. The path ahead is always soft, cushioned by fallen leaves, and the air feels warm against your skin, carrying the faint scent of sap and blossoms that bloom far above your head. There is a sense of balance here, an unspoken harmony that fills the space between every sound. For the people who live within this vast landscape, stories are carried like seeds from one generation to the next. They gather in the evenings, when the heat begins to soften and the shadows grow longer, their voices blending with the crackling of the fire as they speak of ancestors, spirits, and the guiding light of the rivers. These stories do not rush toward conclusions. They move thoughtfully, allowing every listener to see the world, not as a map with borders, but as a living, breathing companion. Firelight dances on their faces as elders describe rituals performed at dawn, ceremonies that honor the sun, the rain, and the spirits that dwell in the forests and beneath the waters. Gold, to them, is not something to be taken or hoarded. It is a color aglow, a sacred reflection of life's connection to the divine. They carry it on their skin during festivals, not to display wealth, but to call forth blessings. When night begins its gentle return, the sky fades into deep shades of blue. Fireflies emerge from the shadows and drift through the air like floating embers, their warm glow scattered among the branches. The river reflects the darkening sky, carrying stars on its surface, as if delivering them from one horizon to the other. Families gather close to share food, stories, and quiet moments while the forest around them slows its breath. Drums echo softly in the distance, their rhythm steady and low, blending with the nighttime chorus of insects. This world is vibrant, full, and sacred, shaped by balance and tradition long before any foreign gaze ever tried to interpret it. It is the world that held the first spark of what would one day be called El Dorado, though its people never imagined their stories would travel beyond the reach of their fires. And so, before the legend grew, before explorers and maps and distant empires gave it new shapes, there was only this, a land of rivers that glowed beneath the sun, forests that wrapped the earth like an endless green ocean, and communities whose stories flowed as naturally as the water itself. Here, in these lands of mist and rivers of light, the world rested in quiet harmony, unaware that whispers of its beauty would one day echo far beyond the jungle's edge. Long before the world beyond the mountains began to turn its gaze toward these lands, small whispers drifted through the forest like wandering spirits. They were not stories spoken with urgency or importance, but gentle tales shared during quiet moments, carried from one village to another by travelers who moved along the rivers with the patience of the water itself. Imagine sitting beside a fire at dusk, the air warm and still, as an elder traces patterns in the dirt with a branch and speaks softly of a ceremony held far. From here, in a land where the lake shines like a sheet of glass, and the morning sun turns everything it touches into gold, their voice remains calm and measured, giving every detail the time it needs to settle in the mind of each listener. These tales drift slowly through the community until they become part of the natural rhythm of life, neither celebrated nor feared, simply accepted as one more thread woven into the fabric of existence. As the stories travel, they begin to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways, not out of deception, but because the land itself changes with every bend in the river. Travelers paddling downstream might speak of a chief covered in shimmering gold dust, stepping into a sacred lake as the dawn breaks and emerging with the sunlight sparkling on his skin like thousands of tiny embers. Those returning from long journeys across the forested highlands might describe a place where offerings of carved wood-woven cloth and precious stones are placed upon the waters so they may drift toward the spirits who watch over the people. Some say the lake is so still it reflects the sky perfectly, while others insist that it is surrounded by hills that glow in the early morning light. None of them claim to have seen it with their own eyes. They speak only of what they have heard, letting the mystery remain intact. Meanwhile, in villages along the higher rivers, the wind carries rumors in ways that feel almost accidental. Hunters resting under the shade of towering trees listen to distant. Visitors share quiet accounts of ceremonies unlike anything they have known. Women grinding maize in the early morning light hum softly, while they repeat fragments of a tale heard from a cousin or a friend, shaping the story with their own understanding. Children sit near the entrances of their homes, their eyes wide with curiosity as they listen to travelers describe landscapes where the sun seems to linger longer, where the air holds a warmth that feels almost like a blessing. The stories grow not because of ambition or desire, but because people here have always shared the world through their voices, their songs, and their memories. Every tale becomes a way of keeping the land alive. In the deeper parts of the forest, where the canopy thickens and the light falls in thin, wavering stripes, these whispers take on an almost sacred quality. They are spoken in low tones beside rivers that move with steady purpose, their surfaces shimmering with reflections of clouds drifting overhead. At night, the tales feel different. Fires crackle softly, and the glow of the embers casts a warm light on the faces gathered around. Someone might recall a visit from a neighboring village where the chief wore ornaments that glowed like captured sunlight. Another might speak of people who believe gold is not a metal but the physical form of the sun as spirit, a reminder that light itself holds power. The forest listens to these stories, absorbing them with the stillness of an old friend who has heard countless versions across countless generations. Across valleys and over ridges, the stories continue to drift, changing shape like smoke rising from a fire. Some communities hear of a leader who covers himself in shimmering dust as part of a sacred rite meant to honor the dawn. Others hear of a place where the ground contains veins of glittering earth that sparkle beneath the midday sun. In some versions, the offering of gold is a way of thanking the spirits for life and abundance. In others, it symbolizes the connection between people and the cycles of nature. None of these accounts contain greed or ambition. They are stories of beauty, reverence, and harmony, shaped by people who see the world not as something to be conquered but as something to be honored. As the wind moves through the forest, brushing past leaves and stirring the surface of the rivers, these tales continue to flow quietly from one voice to another. They settle into the minds of those who hear them, not as promises or instructions, but as gentle invitations to imagine a world where the boundary between the earthly and the divine is thinner than it seems. In Tis, world gold is not treasure. It is light. It is memory. It is the way the morning sun paints the land. And so, while no single storyteller claims to know the whole truth, each voice contributes to a growing sense that somewhere, perhaps behind a curtain of mist, perhaps beyond the next bend in the river, there exists a place touched by something extraordinary. The rumors remain soft, drifting without urgency, yet they begin to gather weight in the quiet spaces between conversations, forming the early echoes of a legend that will one day reach far beyond the forest. There comes a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when a story that has drifted softly through the air begins to take shape in the hearts of those who hear it. The stories of shimmering dust and sacred lakes do not push anyone forward. nor do they promise transformation. Instead, they rest gently in the mind like a seed carried on a breeze, settling into the soil of curiosity. In small communities along the rivers and forest paths, there are always a few who feel a subtle pull toward the distant landscapes described in whispers. They are not driven by ambition or desire, but by a quiet longing to understand the world that stretches beyond the familiar grove of trees or the bend in the river they have known since childhood. One morning, perhaps after a night of listening to elders speak around the fire, a traveler might rise before the sun pack, a woven bag with dried fruit and maize cakes, and step into the cool dawn with no destination other than forward. The forest receives them with its familiar warmth, welcoming but indifferent, as if acknowledging that journeys begin with questions, not answers. The first steps into the deeper forest feel both familiar and new. Shafts of early light slip through the branches overhead, illuminating dust motes that dance gently in the air. The soil is soft beneath their feet, still damp from the night's moisture, and leaves brushed by their legs release subtle fragrances of resin and dew. Birds call from hidden perches high above, shifting from sleepy murmurs to bright morning songs that echo through the canopy. The traveler moves slowly, not out of fear, but because every step reveals something delicate. The curl of a fern, the droplet trembling at the edge of a leaf, the faint trace of an animal's footprint pressed into the earth. This is not a march into the unknown. It is a quiet conversation with the land, a gradual unfolding of places that have always been there, waiting patiently to be noticed. As the sun rises higher, the forest becomes a world of layered sounds. Cicadas hum from the shadows, water drips rhythmically from broad leaves, and the rustling of small creatures weaves through the undergrowth. The path is not a straight line, but a meandering ribbon shaped by roots, rocks, and the natural flow of the land. Travelers stop often to drink from the river or to sit in the shade of towering trees whose thick trunks hold centuries of silent memory. The air tastes different in the deep forest, and rich with the scent of earth, and the farther they move, the more distant the familiar sounds of their villages become. Yet nothing about the journey feels lonely. Each sound, each movement, each shifting shadow becomes a companion, a reminder that the forest is alive and aware. Sometimes, as the day stretches toward its warmest hours, travelers meet others along the way. Hunters returning from the highlands with woven baskets filled with roots and game, or elders who walk with slow, careful steps leaning on carved wooden staffs. These meetings are gentle, unhurried exchanges. A traveler might sit beside the elders on a fallen log and share water or fruit while listening to them speak of the lands ahead. They describe river forks where the water grows cool and fast, clearings where the wind carries a sweet, floral scent, or hills where the ground warms quickly beneath the sun. Their stories blend seamlessly with the tales already heard around village fires, adding new layers of curiosity without clarifying where myth ends and truth begins. The forest remains a place where certainty is unnecessary. As the afternoon deepens, the light shifts into warmer tones that drape across the landscape like a soft, golden cloth. The travel continues on, guided not by markers or maps, but by intuition and the natural flow of the land. Sometimes they follow the course of a stream that sparkles with sunlight. Other times they choose a path, marked by the rhythmic tapping of a distant woodpecker or the sight of a brightly colored bird weaving between branches. In these moments of quiet exploration, the traveler becomes acutely aware of the world's vastness. Each corner of the forest holds a story, each river bend a memory, and each mountain ridge a secret carried by the wind. Night approaches with a calm, steady grace. The temperature begins to fall, and the forest exhales a cool breath that carries the scent of leaves returning to shadow. The traveler finds a safe place near the river to rest, gathering a few dry branches to build a small fire. As flames rise and flicker, their warm glow dances across the surface of the water, turning it into a trembling ribbon of amber light. The sounds of the forest shift into their nighttime rhythm. Soft chirps, low hums, distant splashes. The traveler sits quietly, watching the fire and listening to the world settle around them. They reflect on the stories that first stirred their curiosity, realizing that the journey itself has become more important than whatever truth lies ahead. The forest does not reveal its secrets quickly, and those who walk its paths understand that the unknown is not something to fear, but something to honor. In the deep stillness of the night, as stars begin to appear one by one through the canopy. The traveler feels the gentle truth that all journeys begin with simple steps, taken with an open heart. They lie down on a woven mat, the earth warm beneath them, and close their eyes, while the fire's last embers glow softly beside the river. The stories of shimmering lakes and golden dust remain distant, drifting at the edges of imagination. Yet with each moment spent within the forest's embrace, the traveler moves closer to a world shaped, not by myth or ambition, but by the slow, patient pulse of the land itself. Far from the mist-covered rivers and the endless canopy of green, across mountains, coastlines, and unfamiliar horizons, the world was stirring in its own quiet ways. In distant cities built of stone and dust where the morning sun rose over plazas crowded with merchants and travelers, small fragments of stories from the forest lands began to drift into conversations, like stray notes carried on a wandering wind. These early whispers did not arrive as declarations or proclamations. They came in the form of passing remarks exchanged between sailors unloading their cargo, or murmured curiosity shared between scribes who spent long hours copying letters and reports. Someone might mention a tale heard from a man who claimed to have spoken to another who once traveled inland, where certain communities revered gold, not as treasure, but as the breath of the sun. Even these faint echoes felt intriguing, although no one could clearly trace their origin. In ports along the northern coast of South America, the echo grew slightly louder. Traders who moved between inland communities and coastal markets carried not only woven textiles, carved objects, and dried fruits, but also the stories flowing from the great rivers. They spoke of lakes used for rituals at dawn, of shimmering dust, of ceremonies filled with reverence. Their words were unhurried, spoken with the casual certainty of people who share what they believe to be part of the world's natural rhythm. The listeners, however, heard something different, something mysterious, perhaps even alluring. These coastal towns were places where sailors from faraway lands paused between long voyages. They listened with interest, leaning against wooden beams of warehouses or standing in the shade of palm trees as the breeze brought in the smell of salt and heat. Stories, once filtered through many voices, began to shift in tone, gaining details that were neither confirmed nor questioned. As ships departed from these ports and sailed back across the sea, the whispers traveled with them. Long journeys across the ocean had a way of transforming simple tales into possibilities. On calm nights when the waves moved in slow, rolling breaths and the lantern swayed gently in the ship's hold, sailors exchanged accounts of lands draped in green forests and rivers that glowed beneath the sun. These conversations, shared to pass time, offered a glimpse into a world so distant it felt almost like a dream. By the time ships reached the great harbors of Europe, the stories had shifted once, again still soft, still uncertain, but carrying a faint shimmer that caught the attention of those accustomed to hearing rumors of distant lands. In royal courts and administrative halls, where the air was thick with candle smoke and the rustle of heavy garments, the whispers found new listeners. Letters written in careful script described regions inland where the people honored gold in ways unfamiliar to Europeans. Reports spoke of objects, finely worked, of craftsmanship that suggested skill but not accumulation, of rituals in which the metal was used not to display wealth, but to honor something sacred. The tone of these accounts was calm, often hesitant, and delivered without certainty. Yet in rooms filled with ornate tapestries and polished floors, such stories tended to grow in significance simply by being spoken aloud. Advisors discussed them in low voices, not because they believed every word, but because the presence of even the faintest mystery was enough to stir interest. Gradually, as the stories traveled deeper into the minds of those who heard them, they began to settle into the spaces where imagination and curiosity intertwined. Scholars and map-makers, working under dim lamps late into the night, found themselves sketching the shapes of rivers they had never seen, guided only by the vague descriptions of travelers who might have once stood on their banks. They traced possible routes inland, placing mountains and forests onto paper with strokes that blended fact with guesswork. The maps that emerged were not precise, but they carried the promise of landscapes, unexplored, a promise that echoed softly through the corridors of Europe. Yet even with all this movement, the world did not shift suddenly. There was no rush, no urgency. The legend, still fragile, drifted quietly from voice to voice like a thin thread weaving itself through the imagination of distant empires. In some places, the story was dismissed as an embellishment. In others, it lingered, turning slowly into a question, then into a possibility. No one claimed certainty, and no one fully understood the land behind the rumors. But curiosity has its own quiet momentum, and soon the idea of a distant place touched by gold not as wealth, but as radiance began to take root. The world beyond the forest was vast and layered, full of ambition, hope, and longing. And somewhere within that mix of wandering sailors, observant traders, thoughtful scribes, and intrigued nobles, the echoes of a sacred lake and golden dust began to resonate, not loudly, not clearly, but enough to shift the air in those distant halls, enough to suggest that perhaps, somewhere across the ocean, there existed a place where the sun touched the earth in ways no one had yet understood. As stories of distant landscapes and shimmering rituals continued to drift across oceans and through forest paths, a quieter, more human layer began to form beneath them. Those who felt the pull to travel deeper into the unknown often discovered that curiosity is not a straight line. It twists, hesitates, and occasionally folds back into itself, like a river searching for its true course. Deep within the forest, where the air grows warmer and the canopy thickens into a dense blanket of leaves, travelers sometimes paused in the shade of towering trees and felt uncertainty settle gently onto their shoulders. It did not come as fear or regret, but as a soft internal question. Why am I going farther? The forest, with its low hums and shifting shadows, offered no answers. Instead, it simply held the silence, allowing each traveler to listen inwardly. The deeper they moved, the more the world around them seemed to shift in subtle ways. Paths that had once felt straightforward now curved unexpectedly, shaped by roots that rose from the earth like ancient veins. The sound of running water could appear suddenly in the distance, only to fade as they approached, as if the river itself was playing a quiet game of hidden. Nights grew heavier, filled with the buzzing chorus of insects and the steady breathing of the forest. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the unfamiliar rustle of leaves or the low call of unseen animals. In these moments, travelers often felt the first true weight of the journey, not as danger but as the realization that they were far from home, surrounded by a world that had existed long before their footsteps touched the soil. Sometimes, the doubts came from within the traveling groups themselves. Walking for days under the mottled light of the forest canopy, companions shared whispered concerns, spoken in low tones so as not to disturb the peace of the land around them. One might wonder whether the stories they had heard were merely reflections of hope shaped by passing voices. Another might confess that the forest felt too vast, its silence too deep, its shadows too dense to ever reveal what lay ahead. These exchanges were gentle, more like shared breaths than disagreements. They did not weaken the group. Instead, they exposed the simple truth that even people united by a shared curiosity carry their own quiet hesitations. The forest seemed to listen to every whispered doubt. Its presence was steady and calm, neither encouraging nor discouraging. Tall trees stood like patient guardians, their trunks wrapped in vines that glimmered softly when touched by the scattered sunlight. Pools of still water reflected the canopy above, creating mirror-like surfaces that made it difficult to tell where the world ended and its reflection began. Travelers sometimes knelt beside these pools, watching their own faces blur with the shifting leaves overhead. In those moments, they felt a strange blend of humility and wonder, as if the forest were reminding them that uncertainty is a natural companion on any long path. There were practical doubts as well. Food supplies, though carefully rationed, never felt abundant. The forest offered fruits, roots, and fish. But the travelers needed to move slowly and respectfully to gather what they needed. The humidity clung to their clothes, making every movement heavier. Sometimes sudden rainstorms swept through, filling the air with the scent of wet earth and sending small streams cascading down slopes that moments earlier had been dry. These challenges were not severe enough to halt their progress, but they created a gentle pressure, a reminder that every step required intention and patience. Even the most seasoned among them occasionally paused, hands resting on their knees, eyes scanning the trees with a quiet sense of humility. Yet for every moment of doubt, the forest offered a counterbalance, a glint of sunlight through branches, a bird's bright call, the discovery of a new plant whose petals glowed like tiny lanterns. These quiet gifts did not erase uncertainty, but they softened it, reminding the travelers that the unknown was not a void, but a landscape full of life. In the evenings, when the group gathered around small fires, whose flames flickered against the trunks of massive trees, they shared stories that blended memories of home with the experiences of the day. Laughter rose occasionally into the night air, mingling with the crackling wood and creating brief moments of warmth that held their doubts at bay. As more time passed, the doubts transformed rather than disappeared. They became part of the travelers' rhythm, woven into their footsteps like a low melody accompanying the louder songs of the forest. They understood that uncertainty did not mean they were lost. It meant they were moving through a world larger than their understanding, a world that demanded both respect and patience. Beneath the canopy where sunlight moved in soft shifting patterns, they continued forward, not because they were certain of what lay ahead, but because the forest's gentle living presence guided them deeper into its heart, inviting them to walk with both caution and wonder. Night often reveals what daylight keeps hidden, not through sudden revelations, but through the slow unfurling of details that feel different when wrapped in darkness. After many days of walking beneath the thick green canopy, the travelers found themselves in a quiet clearing where the forest opened just enough for the sky to appear in a soft mosaic of stars. The air was cooler here, touched by a faint breeze drifting down from distant highlands they had not yet seen. They built a small fire at the center of the clearing, its flames rising in gentle waves that cast long, wavering shadows across the grass. As they settled down to rest, something about the night felt different, not ominous, not urgent, simply attentive, as though the forest itself was leaning closer, listening to their presence. For a long while, no one spoke. The silence felt full rather than empty, shaped by the hum of insects and the subtle rustling of leaves stirred by the breeze. The fire crackled softly, releasing occasional sparks that drifted upward before disappearing into the dark. Eventually, one of the elders traveling with the group reached into a woven bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a carefully drawn map, made not of lines and measurements, but of symbols passed down through generations. Mountains were marked by spirals, rivers by flowing strokes, and sacred places by small, radiant shapes. Until this moment, the map had merely been a companion to their journey, a familiar guide with no urgency. But tonight, held in the warm light of the fire, it seemed to reveal something new. The elder smoothed the cloth across the ground, pressing the corners gently with stones. The others leaned in, their faces illuminated by the shifting glow. They had looked at these marks many times before, but under the silent gaze of the stars. Certain patterns appeared clearer, as if the forest itself was confirming what had always been there. The spirals of the mountains aligned in a way no one had noticed, suggesting a passage between ridges that could lead toward a lake rumored in the earliest stories. The flowing strokes that represented rivers seemed to converge, forming a path that matched the direction they had unknowingly taken over the past few days. Nothing about the map changed physically, yet its meaning deepened, unfolding like a leaf gradually unfurling in the morning sun. Someone pointed toward a symbol near the upper EJ, small circles surrounded by radiating lines. It was a mark of reverence, used in stories to signify a place touched by the spirit, a place where dawn rituals were performed. The travelers had always assumed it represented a symbolic idea rather than a literal location, but looking at it now, under the fire's glow, the circles seemed to mirror the descriptions carried through rumors of the shimmering lake where golden dust was offered to the rising sun. The group fell into a thoughtful stillness, not out of shock, but out of quiet recognition. The journeys of many before them, the stories shared across fires and winds, and the path they had taken through the forest all pointed toward this symbol with an unexpected clarity. As the fire dwindled into glowing embers, the travelers sat back and allowed the weight of this realization to settle into their thoughts. The night wrapped around them like a soft cloak, filled with the constant heartbeat of the forest. The stars above seemed sharper, as if acknowledging the subtle shift taking place below. No one declared a new purpose. No one spoke of discovery or destiny. Instead, a shared understanding emerged, gentle and steady. Their path, once guided by curiosity alone, now felt connected to something deeper on intention shaped by countless voices that came before them. Later, when the fire had nearly faded, the elder folded the map with careful hands and returned it to the woven bag. The group lay down on mats, arranged in a circle around the remaining embers, each person feeling the cool earth beneath them. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the soft chorus of the forest and the distant rush of a river hidden beyond the trees. In the delicate stillness of that night, the world seemed to shift ever so slightly. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but the travelers now carried with them a quiet sense of direction, not forced upon them, but gently revealed. By morning, nothing visible had changed. The forest was the same. The air carried the same warm fragrance of leaves, and the river continued its steady murmur. Yet within each traveler, something had settled into place. The night had drawn a subtle line on the map of their minds, guiding them toward the lake whispered about in stories, not as treasure, but as a place where men waited patiently to be understood. And so at the first light of dawn, brushing the tops of the trees, they rose and continued walking, carrying with them the memory of the night when the map seemed to breathe and the path ahead became softly illuminated. The farther the travelers moved into the interior, the more the weight of the journey settled onto their bodies and their thoughts, not as a sudden burden, but as a gradual heaviness that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Days blended into one another as they walked beneath the canopy, their steps softened by layers of fallen leaves and damp soil. The forest that had once felt like a curious companion now revealed a deeper, more complex side, one shaped by silence, density, and time. The air hung thicker, filled with the scent of moss and flowering vines. Sounds that once felt vibrant now seemed muted, absorbed by the vastness of the foliage. With each passing day, their breaths grew slower, their shoulders slightly heavier, and their dreams at night more vivid and tangled. It was not weariness alone, but the unsettling realization that the path ahead, while meaningful, was beginning to stretch farther than they had imagined. Some May mornings, the group awoke to find that a soft mist had settled over everything, hiding the familiar shapes of trees and turning the world into a gentle blur of gray and green. Moving through this haze felt like walking inside a memory, quiet, distant, and difficult to grasp fully. Their voices sounded different, muted by the fog as they exchanged brief words to orient themselves. At times, the mists lifted suddenly, revealing sunlit branches overhead, only to return minutes later as if the forest were exhaling in long, slow breaths. The shifting light played tricks on their perception, creating illusions of paths that vanished upon approach, or shadows that looked like companions standing just beyond reach. These moments made the travelers pause, wondering if the stories they pursued were drifting farther away instead of growing closer. Food became more difficult to gather. The fruit they once picked with ease grew sparse as they entered unfamiliar terrain. Streams appeared less frequently, and the water they found sometimes required long pauses to collect and filter. Nights grew colder as they climbed into regions where the land rose gradually. They huddled closer to their small fires, the flames casting trembling rings of warmth that faded quickly into the dark. The sounds of the forest deepened at night as well, low, rhythmic calls from unseen creatures, the steady rustling of branches, the soft patter of leaves falling. Some in the group found themselves waking abruptly, unsure of whether a sound or a dream had disturbed them. The darkness was not threatening, but it carried an overwhelming density, as if the forest were pressing gently against their thoughts. As their bodies adjusted to the strain, their minds began to wrestle with quiet realizations. The idea of the shimmering lake, once a distant and almost playful curiosity, now felt like a weight they carried. The stories they had followed for so long seemed less like guideposts and more like distant echoes fading into the trees. Some nights, sitting beside the fire, they wondered aloud whether the lake existed in the way they imagined, or whether it was meant to be understood differently, perhaps as a place of spirit rather than a physical destination. These conversations were not debates. They were soft admissions shared between people whose minds had been stretched by the long, quiet days. Doubt no longer whispered at the edges of their thoughts. It walked beside them openly, shaping their understanding in a gentle, steady way. Occasionally, a member of the group would step away for a moment of solitude, finding a patch of open sky where the trees parted just enough to reveal the fading light of evening. Standing there, they would watch the sky shift from gold to deep blue, feeling the breeze cool their skin and soothe their tired muscles. These moments of stillness brought a different kind of heaviness and emotional weight made of longing for home, for familiar faces, for the simplicity of life before the journey began. They carried memories with them like stones kept in a pouch. The echo of laughter in their villages, the warmth of shared meals, the smell of rain on thatched roofs. The distance from those memories felt especially wide on nights when the forest fell completely silent. Yet the forest offered moments of solace as well, small gifts that reminded them why they continued. A rare bird might glide across the path, its feathers shimmering like embers. A cluster of flowers could bloom in a clearing, their scent so sweet it seemed to lift the fatigue from their limbs. One evening, after many days of unbroken forest, the group reached a high ridge where the trees opened to reveal a sweeping view of valleys and rivers below. The sun was setting, and the sky blazed in soft hues of orange and violet, painting the land with a quiet radiance. The travelers stood in silence for a long time, feeling both the vastness of the world and their small, fragile place within it. The weight in their hearts did not disappear, but in that moment it softened, transformed into a gentle reminder that beauty existed even in the hardest stretches of the journey. When they descended from the ridge and made camp for the night, the group moved with a calm familiarity, each person performing small tasks without needing to speak. The fire burned steadily, its glow reflecting in their tired eyes. They shared food, water, and quiet thoughts, their voices almost blending with the nighttime breeze. They did not speak of turning back. They did not speak of certainty either. Instead, they let the heaviness of their dreams settle into the earth around them, allowing the forest to hold part of the weight. In the stillness, they understood that the search for the lake, the search for meaning, for understanding, for connection was not a straight line. It was a journey shaped by moments of clarity and moments of doubt, by the resilience of the body and the tenderness of the spirit. And so, beneath the canopy where dusk deepened into night, the travelers closed their eyes and let sleep come slowly, carrying with it the quiet truth that dreams sometimes grow heavy before they reveal their light. As the travelers continued their quiet passage, through the highlands and down into the sprawling wetlands, landscape began to shift in ways that felt subtle yet deeply meaningful, as though the earth itself were offering small gestures of acknowledgement. The forests gradually opened into wider spaces where tall grasses swayed in the warm breeze, and the air carried a different scentless dense, more open, tinged with the freshness of nearby water. They began to hear the low, steady murmur of a great river long before they saw it, a sound so constant it seemed to pulse in rhythm with the earth. When they finally emerged onto a soft bank overlooking the broad flow of the Orinoco, they paused in quiet awe. The river stretched like a great ribbon of living light, its surface reflecting the sky in shades of blue and pale gold. After so many days enclosed within dense canopy, the openness felt like a gift, wide and embracing. They walked along the shore for hours, letting the damp sand cool their tired feet. The river moved with a calm insistence, its current a reminder that water shapes the world slowly, but with unwavering purpose. Small villages clustered along the banks came into view, their homes raised slightly above the earth on sturdy poles, shaped by generations who understood the river's patterns. The travelers approached gently, respecting the rhythms of daily life. As they entered the villages, they were welcomed with quiet curiosity. The people living there spoke in calm, lyrical tones, their words weaving together stories, observations, and gestures of hospitality. These communities carried a rich heritage of River Nolitao, how its waters rose and fell, where fish gathered in abundance, and how to navigate its many branching paths. In these villages, the travelers found the first gentle signs that the stories they had followed were rooted not only in myth, but in lived experience. On some of the elders' bodies, faint traces of shimmering pigments appeared along their arms and faces during ceremonial gatherings. The colors caught the light at certain angles, revealing a mixture of minerals and plant-based dyes. No one boasted about these decorations. They were worn humbly, as offerings of beauty and meaning rather than symbols of wealth. The travelers sat among the villagers as night fell, listening to soft songs that rose into the darkness like drifting prayers. These melodies spoke of rivers that reflected the sun like polished mirrors, of lakes held sacred, not because of the metal within them, but because they were believed to bridge the physical world with the world of spirits. For the first time, the travelers sensed a thread connecting the stories they had carried with them and the culture they now witnessed firsthand. As they continued along the Orinoco, The land revealed relics of journeys taken by others long before them. They found carved wooden objects half buried near the river's edge, their patterns intricate and purposeful. Nearby, clusters of polished stones lay arranged in circular shapes, softened by time but still holding the imprint of ritual. The travelers studied these artifacts with reverence, touching them gently, imagining the hands that had shaped them generations ago. None of these objects spoke of treasure. They spoke instead of ceremony, community, and the quiet passage of time. The river seemed to hold the memory of all who had walked its banks, its currents carrying whispers of songs, footsteps, and offerings. The deeper they moved into this river world, the more clearly they saw the traces of journeys, both old and ongoing. Canoes glided past them with the effortless grace of people who had been born to the waterways. Children played along the banks, splashing water that sparkled in the sun. Fishermen cast nets, woven with patterns that mimicked the flow of the river, their movements slow and practiced. At night, when the moon rose high and reflected off the water's surface, the entire river seemed to glow, turning the world into a vast, luminous corridor. The travelers sat on the banks, their feet submerged in the cool water, watching small ripples distort the moon's round shape. In these quiet moments, they felt something stirring within them, a sense that their journey had reached a place where stories became more than words. One morning, just after dawn, the group encountered an elder who lived in a small dwelling near the mouth of a tributary. His face was lined with years spent under the sun and wind, and his eyes held a depth shaped by the river's long memory. He invited them to sit beneath the shade of a tree whose branches spread wide like a protective canopy. As they shared water and fruit, he spoke of a lake hidden beyond the low mountains, where rituals of renewal had been performed long before his time. He described how the people of that region coated themselves in shimmering powders not to appear adorned, but to embody the spirit of the rising sun during ceremonies of gratitude. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of generations. He did not speak of gold as outsiders understood it. He spoke of light, of reflection, of the way certain lakes captured the dawn so perfectly that water and sky seemed to merge into one. Hearing these words, the travelers felt a profound quiet settle within them. They realized that their path had not been shaped by chance. Each step had carried them toward a place connected not by wealth or illusion, but by meaning deeply rooted in the land and its people. The river, with its countless branches and hidden passages, had guided them gently toward this understanding. They had not found a city of gold or answers carved into stone, but they had found a living legacy of footprints in water, stories woven into ritual, and a landscape whose presence shaped everything around it. As the day faded into evening, the travelers stood at the river's edge, watching the currents move with slow determination. They felt the weight of their journey lighten, replaced by a calm sense of direction. Ahead lay new paths, uncertain but illuminated by the gentle wisdom of the river. With the soft murmur of the Orinoco guiding them onward, they prepared to continue not in search of treasure, but in search of understanding, quietly carried by the water's timeless flow. As the travelers continued their passage along the river's branching veins, a subtle shift began to weave itself through their days. It was not a change in the land, though. The forests grew taller and the hills rose and fell like gentle wave snore. Was it something that appeared suddenly before them? Instead, it was a feeling, a soft awareness that their footsteps were entering a realm where time did not move in straight lines. Here, stories settled into the air like smoke rising from a distant fire. They drifted slowly, curling and unraveling in patterns that felt both familiar and entirely new. Every breeze seemed to carry whispers of generations long gone, and every evening light cast shadows that hinted at memories older than any living person could name. The travelers found themselves walking not only through earth and forest, but through layers of remembrance woven tightly into the land. In the villages scattered along the tributaries, elders welcomed them with voices shaped by long years and deeper wisdom. They spoke not in hurried explanations, but in slow, spiraling narratives, beginning with events that happened in the present and sliding effortlessly into tales of ancestors who once walked the same paths. These stories were told beside fires, whose smoke rose lazily into the night sky, drifting upward like threads carrying the weight of old prayers. Children listened with wide, steady eyes, their bodies still and attentive, as though the stories themselves demanded a kind of quiet reverence. The travelers, seated among them, felt as if they were being gently drawn into a river of memory, where past and present flowed together with no clear boundary between them. Some nights, the group encountered ceremonies where singing began at dusk and continued softly until dawn. The songs moved in long, looping melodies that seemed to echo across centuries. The words filled with references to water, sun, and spirit wove themselves into the travelers' thoughts, long after the music faded. Even when no ceremonies took place, the forest itself felt alive with echoes. The rustling of leaves hinted at voices telling stories just beyond hearing, as though ancestors still wandered the edges of the villages, observing, murmuring, and guiding. The travelers sensed these presences not with their eyes, but with an inner stillness, a recognition that memory in these lands was not confined to the mind but lived in the soil, the water, and the air. As the days passed, the journey took on a rhythm shaped by reflection. During long stretches of walking, each traveler found themselves revisiting the path they had taken not to analyze or judge it, but to understand how it had shaped them. They remembered the mist-heavy mornings, the quiet doubts beneath the canopy, the long nights spent listening to the steady pulse of the forest. These memories rose and drifted through their thoughts, much like the smoke that curled into the night sky, visible for a moment, then dissolving into something larger. The stories told by the elders mingled with their own experiences, creating a tapestry of meaning that deepened with every step. Occasionally, they came upon objects left behind by those who had passed through the land long before them. A carved pendant, half buried in the soil, worn smooth by time. A fragment of painted pottery resting among river stones. A ceremonial staff wrapped in vines, as though being reclaimed by the forest. None of these items felt like remnants of lost treasure. They were offerings of memory, traces of lives woven into the land's continuity. The travelers held these objects gently before returning them to the earth, sensing that they were touching not artifacts, but stories that had no clear beginning or end. Stories that lived quietly within the land. The river's sound deepened as they moved farther south, and its currents grew wider and more complex. At dusk, the water reflected the fading light with such clarity that the sky seemed to dissolve into the river itself. In these moments, the travelers often sat together in silence, watching the horizon blur. The edges of their individual experiences began to fade as well, merging into a shared understanding that the journey was no longer just theirs. They were part of a continuum, one thread in a tapestry woven across generations. The legend they had followed of dust that shimmered, of lakes that reflected the sun felt less like a destination and more like a doorway into the deeper memory of the region. As evening settled around them one night, a gentle breeze carried the scent of distant smoke not from their own fire, but from another village hidden beyond the curve of the river. The smell was warm and comforting, filled with the familiarity of cooked maize, burning wood, and herbs used in rituals. The smoke drifted upward, swirling into the sky in soft, wandering spirals. Watching it, the travelers realized that every story they had heard, every voice they had met, and every step they had taken had become part of their own memory, carried with them like the rising smoke. It did not matter whether the shimmering lake awaited them beyond the next ridge. What mattered was the legacy of voices, footsteps, and echoes that had woven itself around them. And so, beneath the dimming sky, where stars began to appear like faint sparks of old stories, the travelers rested. The forests murmured around them, soft and rhythmic. The river flowed steadily, carrying memories down its winding course, and the stories those that had guided them, those that had changed them, and those yet to be told continued to swirl gently in the air, settling into their hearts like smoke dissolving into night. As the travelers neared the final stretches of their journey, the world around them felt profoundly changed, not because the landscape had shifted suddenly, but because they now moved through it with new eyes. The forests, rivers, and distant hills no longer seemed like obstacles or mysteries. They felt like companions that had walked alongside them, whispering gentle guidance through every rise and fall of the land. Each sound carried a deeper meaning now. The murmur of flowing water held the memory of countless voices. The rustling of leaves seemed to echo with the laughter and stories of people they had met along the way. The glowing embers of their nightly fires reflected not only warmth, but the quiet persistence of hope. By the time they reached the high plateau where the air cooled and the sky stretched wide and open, they realized that their journey had already given them what they sought not. A city made of gold, but a world where light and memory intertwined so deeply that the boundary between legend and truth no longer mattered. From that plateau, they could see far into the distance valleys curled like sleeping animals, rivers glinting beneath the morning sun, and scattered lakes shimmering faintly as though holding the sky within their waters. One lake in particular caught their attention. It lay still and smooth, gathered in a natural bowl between gentle slopes, and as the sun lifted over the horizon, its surface brightened until it seemed to glow with its own quiet radiance. There was no golden city rising from its depths, no towers or walls, no wealth hidden beneath the water. Yet the light it cast felt sacred, soft and warm against the skin, as if it were reflecting not just the sun but generations of rituals performed at its edge. The travelers stood silently, recognizing that this glow, this merging of water and light, was the luminous heart of the stories they had followed since their first steps beneath the forest canopy. When they approached the lake's shore, they found no treasures, but they found traces of present circles of stone arranged with care, worn paths leading to the water's edge, and the faint shimmer of mineral dust lingering in the soil, catching the early light in barely visible glints. They touched the ground gently, sensing the echoes of ceremonies held here long ago. The people who once gathered at this lake had not sought wealth. They had sought connection. They had honored the sun's return by covering themselves in shimmering powders that symbolized renewal, gratitude, and harmony. This place was not a city that never slept in the way later Thales imagined. It was a place where memory never rested, where every dawn ceremony wove new threads into the fabric of the land. The travelers sat near the water as morning warmed into day, letting the silence settle around them. It was a silence rich with presence, the kind that holds countless stories without ever needing to speak. They felt themselves part of something much larger than their journey, a lineage of curiosity that stretched backward and forward through time. Even though they would one day return home, the lake's reflection would remain in their memory like a soft, enduring pulse. They understood then why stories drifted across generations, not to guide people to a physical place, but to guide them toward understanding the world with gentler eyes, to remind them that beauty often lies in the quiet spaces where the earth listens. As the day continued, the group rose and walked slowly along the lake's perimeter. Their footsteps left soft impressions in the soil, footprints that would soon be erased by wind or water, yet carried in the memory of the land all the same. They knew that others would arrive in the future, wanderers, dreamers, storytellers, each drawn by a longing they might not fully understand. The travelers did not fear this. They sensed that the land had a way of offering its truth only to those who moved with humility and patience. The lake would reveal itself again and again, not through spectacle, but through the shimmering quiet at dawn, the scent of the earth after rain, and the soft glow that danced across the water like a promise. By evening, when the sky deepened into shades of blue and violet, the travelers prepared to rest for the night. They built a fire close to the lake's edge, watching as its light mirrored in the water, creating the illusion of two flames of fire in the world above and a fire in the world below. As they lay under the open sky, their thoughts drifted gently, guided by everything they had seen and felt. They understood now that El Dorado was never meant to be found in any single place. It lived in the stories passed from voice to voice, in the rituals shaped by gratitude, in the glow of morning light on sacred water. It lived in the journey itself. And so, wrapped in the quiet of the plateau, they closed their eyes, letting the night embrace them. The golden city that never slept was not a city at all, but a memory that shimmered across centuries, carried in the land, the rivers, and the hearts of all who walked toward it with open minds and steady breaths. As our journey comes to a quiet close, let yourself remain for a moment beside the still waters of that sacred lake, where morning light and memory blend into one gentle glow. Imagine the last traces of daylight fading into soft shades of blue, while the surface of the water holds the dim reflection of the sky like a calm, steady breath. The warmth of the day slips gently from your shoulders, replaced by the cool embrace of the evening air. Around you, the sounds of the land settle into their nighttime rhythm, the faint rustling of leaves, the distant call of nightbirds, the soft ripple of water moving in slow, thoughtful currents. Allow these sounds to wrap around you like a blanket, soothing and familiar, guiding you into a quieter place within yourself. You have walked through forests heavy with mist, crossed rivers that shimmered beneath the sun, and listened to voices shaped by centuries of tradition. You have witnessed stories that drifted like smoke and memories woven into the land like threads of gold. Whether you traveled through every moment awake or let some chapters drift peacefully past you, the journey lives within you now. Carried gently in the soft corners of your mind, let that feeling linger light, comforting, unhurried. It is the kind of memory that stays with you, not because of what was discovered, but because of how the world felt around you as you moved through it. As you breathe slowly, imagine yourself lying beside the quiet water, watching the stars appear one by one overhead. Their light is faint but steady, like the distant echoes of all the stories we have traced tonight. The land is calm, the river continues its patient path forward, and the night holds you with the same tenderness it has offered to countless travelers long before you. With each breath, you can feel the weight of the day easing, the thoughts in your mind loosening, the rhythm of your heart settling into something soft and peaceful. There is no need to hold on to anything. The world is slow, the night is gentle, and you are safe here. If you feel your eyes growing heavy, let them close. If your breath softens, let it drift naturally. You do not need to stay awake to finish this moment. You are already part of the journey, and the journey will remain with you, even as you slip into sleep. And if you'd like to share where in time or where in the world you're re-listening from, I'd love to read it and carry it with me. And to the next story. When you return, another night will be waiting, another quiet passage through history, held softly in the rhythm of this channel. For now, allow the rivers and forests of this world to fade into the background, merging gently with your dreams. Let the night settle around you like a peaceful tide. Let your body rest. Let your thoughts quiet themselves. You have wandered far enough for one evening, and the world will be here when you wake. Sleep well, and let yourself drift as gently as the Orinoco itself into rest.